On July 21st, 1993, Dr. Avraham Biran, an Israeli archaeologist, discovered a remarkable stone bearing an inscription written in ancient Aramaic. He had found the first reference outside the Bible to King David and a ruling dynasty, evidence of the house of David.
Raise up a king, one of your own. Call him to lead us, establish his throne. I have chosen a shepherd after my heart, King of my people, my anointed one.
Shalom, hello again. We'll continue in our series, The House of David, which is chronicling David's life from David's Tower. That's what this place is called. The talented David, enjoyed a very long reign over Israel. 2 Samuel 5:4-5 says, David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned 30 and 3 years over all Israel and Judah. It's interesting to note, because of today's headlines, that David lived in Hebron, and it was the capital of Judah, and he ruled as king of the Jews some 1,700 years before the first Muslim walked the earth. Hebron is the world's oldest, the oldest Jewish city anywhere. The kingdom expanded in this time. David had a prosperous reign. The ark was brought to the city of David, which is what Jerusalem was called then. Real prosperity came to the people. Archaeologist Bob Mullins talks about David's ancient city of Jerusalem.
Today we are standing on a roof of a building nearby Damascus Gate, overlooking the old city of Jerusalem. And you can see from this vantage point that we have roofs of houses very similar to the way houses would have looked in David's time. One thing that you can see here that David would not have seen, and that are the many television antennas as well as the solar water heaters. In the distance, you can see the golden dome of the rock. And off to the left, one is able to see the Mount of Olives. This roof is attached to the ramparts that surround Jerusalem. Damascus Gate is one of the 8 gates that enter into the city. The other gates are Herod's Gate, St. Stephen's Gate, the Golden Gate, which is now walled up on the east side of the city, Dung Gate, Zion Gate, Jaffa Gate, and then there's also New Gate.
We mentioned Hebron in the beginning of the program, and of course in connection with King David, it's very important. It was important for Abraham too. He purchased land in Hebron to bury Sarah when she died, and then he was buried there beside her. And tradition has it Isaac and Jacob's graves and their wives are there too. And there is a remarkable cave of Machpelah there where Muslims, Jews have always worshipped together, well, up to a point. There was bad action there earlier this year. But it's deep in the West Bank. And it's become a real trouble spot. It is still as the world's first Jewish city, and by purchase. I should bring that out. It's if one believes Scripture, prior title is for sure in this case. The West Bank itself, though, is rough and tough these days, as anyone who reads the papers knows, at least some of the papers. And the Lord has spoken to this. He anticipated. The mountains of Israel is the subject of many Bible passages. Ezekiel 36 is a good one. He says to Ezekiel, "Prophesy therefore concerning the land of Israel, and say unto the mountains and to the hills, to the rivers and to the valleys." That's a good way to characterize the West Bank, which has the mountains and it has the Jordan River Valley. "Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I have spoken in my jealousy and in my fury, because ye have borne the shame of the heathen. Therefore thus saith the Lord God, I have lifted up mine hand. Surely the heathen that are about you, they shall bear their shame. But ye, O mountains of Israel, ye shall shoot forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people of Israel. God has a side in this struggle, and obviously the covenant with Abraham to give the land to the Jews is everlasting. We've repeated it, and we'll stand on it as it is Scripture. We're breaking from our normal House of David format that we've been doing all these weeks. We're not just going to have a historical content, but because of the latest terrorist acts in Israel and so on, we want to comment on those. Recently we've had two terrorist acts in Buenos Aires, one building blown up with precious Jewish records proudly claimed by Arabs. At first somebody thought maybe it's neo-Nazis. This is Argentina after all, and they don't look too carefully at who they harbor there. But it's the Arabs marched forward. They loved it, and 100 people died. There was a second sabotage of an airplane there. Jewish people died. And then some shooting in Jerusalem a couple of weeks ago. And then most recently, the soldier taken hostage, whose mother pleaded before the whole world on international television for his life, but he's gone too. And then the bus in Tel Aviv, the worst of all. These activities were covered in the newspapers, and the whole world knows them, and nobody's been punished up to now. We're making this program a little ahead of when you're seeing it. This is the day the peace treaty is being signed with Jordan, and that is in such contrast to the latest terrorist activities. Some of the Arab personalities, like Jordan for this moment, want to make peace with Israel, obviously have stepped forward and signed up. Other personalities, the Hamas among the Palestinians, want to make war on Israel, and they're doing the best they can. And I always think, I was in correspondence with the New York Times columnist Anthony Lewis for a time, and if you take our newsletter, you saw those letters back and forth. And he challenged me, okay, fine, the land should go to the Jews, but just what would you do with 2 million Palestinians who live there? It's a good question, and I thought about it, but, when my father came to this country, he was born in Latvia. He was not an American. He didn't try to claim this land for other Latvians and so on. He got a job. He didn't fight with police or soldiers, and he put 3 kids through graduate school. He cooperated because he was in a democracy. He did practice his own religion. He didn't assimilate into some Christian American community, really and truly. But the Palestinians, likewise, can live in a democracy. They're the only Arabs in the whole Arab world that have a chance to live in a democracy, Israel. And if they cooperated with the place, I guess they'd have the chance of my father. They could worship in the mosque. They could be Muslims. Israel is a free country, and especially in a religious sense, and they could prosper. I suppose that's a theory. In any case, what's going on now is not working very well. Still in all, statistically, I want to bring this out. Israel is still far, far safer. Jerusalem is safer than New York. Tel Aviv is safer than Washington or Dallas or Los Angeles or Chicago. There's no question. There's no comparison at all. I've given the statistics before, but it's single digits or dozens killed versus hundreds or thousands killed. There's no comparison. We are the hostile and aggressive and terroristic society in the world, I'm afraid. And if you look at the numbers, that's true. I always sleep good in Jerusalem, because my chances of being injured there by some hostile act are so much less than they are in Dallas, to tell you the truth. And our tourists report the same thing. Many testimonials when they come back that at least tourists are not targeted. That would be in nobody's interest. If pilgrims come to the land, they have always had safe passage in Israel. And they say the same. They just feel a peace about the place despite all of the political argument. That's different than street crime like we have here. Frankly, it's a lot less violent, even though we make big headlines about it. Our tours, of course, don't visit Tel Aviv. They don't go to Muslim period sites. We're interested in the Bible, so that takes us away from that action. But the Israelis who live there every day really are a target, and it's a shame. You know, A.M. Rosenthal had a column in the New York Times called Terror and the West, in which he made a very interesting point. He said, the struggle is not primarily against Israel, but the Western concepts of freedom of thought, religion, sexual equality, and political action. Islamic extremists see them as a disease and Israel as a carrier. It's really because Israel's like a little America that it is the Israelis are targeted. And finally, he says, the Christians will be targeted as well. He says other religions will be openly ranked with Judaism as objects of disgust, unclean, destined for oblivion or servitude. The public practice of Christianity is already considered so vile and dangerous that it is banned in Saudi Arabia. And he laments the actions of President Assad of Syria, who Clinton is even now going to see, and we'll see the results of that by the time you see the program, I guess. He says U.S. intelligence sought to release the names of the collections of Middle East officials that supply the terrorists their guns and their money and so forth, even if it would bump up the oil prices a little bit. Well, tourists are okay, and for now America's okay, but the average Israeli on the street, the guy who goes to his job every day, is getting pretty nervous because of things going on over there. And we went to the home of such a person. The Sasson household underwent a terrible tragedy recently. It wasn't covered in the American papers, and since it wasn't, we went there ourselves to cover it for you.
Yes, of course. A terrorist organization took responsibility for the attack.
They were glad to say they shot this pregnant woman in the dark of night in her car.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was introduced to it through my mother. Actually, she told me to watch Zola on the TV, and I happened to turn it on, and I was really impressed with Zola and what he had to say, and it looked like a really good tour. There were so many great events. The Sea of Galilee, Capernaum, and especially the baptism in the River Jordan was a very emotional time for me and very meaningful.
Tour the Holy Land with Zola Levitt. Call or write for more information.
We don't hear much in the media about the many Palestinian acts against Israelis. In order for you to get an idea of what is happening, I spoke with Ronnie Sasson, a victim of a recent Arab attack. Ronnie, thank you for seeing us. I know it's a tough time for you. How long ago did this incident happen?
About 3 months ago.
You were driving with your family in the car.
Every Friday night, the family goes to visit my parents and stays for a meal. Afterwards, we travel home, and it's usually late at night. This incident happened a few minutes before we got home.
According to the picture in the newspaper, there were two gunmen with rifles hiding by the side of the road.
Yes, that is what the police say, but I didn't see any.
You were driving?
Yes.
But your wife was shot.
My wife sat in the front seat on my right side, and the shooting came from the right side.
So she fell on you, or?
Yes.
And you stopped the car?
No.
No, drove away.
I drove away as quickly as possible. I just wanted to get us out of there.
What happened then?
As I was driving away, I tried to signal to the oncoming cars on the highway, but they couldn't understand what I wanted because they didn't know what happened. So I headed for the nearest army base to tell them about the incident. On the way there, I called an ambulance from my car phone. I was also able to call some friends to let them know what had happened.
And the children, what happened with the children?
Within a few seconds after the attack, I took my oldest daughter and laid her on top of my younger daughter. They were both in the back seat. They didn't move until we got to the army base. When we arrived there, I got them out and took care of them.
And your wife was also expecting a child.
כן, מאוד.
Yes.
Was she alive when you came to the army base?
לא, היא הייתה
No,
במצב של...
she was unconscious.
And she never came back to consciousness?
No.
No, she died.
כן.
Yes.
Ronnie, does it make you angry?
בוודאי, אני כועס על
Of course I am angry.
כועס ספציפי על האנשים שעשו.
I'm angry at the specific people who did this thing and the fact that they have not been caught.
Is it for sure that it was Arab terrorists?
כן.
Yes, of course. A terrorist organization took responsibility for the attack.
They were glad to say they shot this pregnant woman in the dark of night in her car.
כן.
Yes.
נדמה לי שבאחד העיתונים...
A spokesman for the terrorist organization came out and said that they were actually shooting against the Israeli army, and they weren't looking to shoot at civilians. But since it involved civilians, it really means that there should not be any Israeli civilians living in this area, and they should all leave. This is how they justified their actions.
The Israeli way of memorializing a place where something significant or tragic took place is done by stacking up stones one on top of another. This particular monument marks the place where Roni's family was ambushed by terrorists. Unfortunately, you see these monuments scattered all along the sides of the highways of Israel. You are living here on a settlement. The Arabs want you out, at least Hamas or whoever did this wants you out. Why did you choose to live on a settlement?
I
went to live there, number one, because it is a beautiful place. It is simply beautiful, and we really liked it. Besides that, the government encouraged us to live there. It didn't matter if it was a right-wing government or a left-wing government. It was the government of Israel that said that we could come and live there because there were no problems. And honestly, I didn't think for a moment that there would be any problems.
Now the government may ask you to leave.
I don't want to leave, but I will. If it is a promise for the advancement of peace in this area, then I will leave. I'll leave, but not because I want to.
Across from the monument, a sign on a wall says, Tzipi, we love you. Tzipi is the name of Zipporah. And it says in Hebrew, we are not moving. The Palestinians have suggested the Israelis ought to move out of the area, but that sign says we're not moving. The wall directly abuts an Arab house in the Arab village, and those are Palestinian cars going back and forth. And of course, anybody who looks at the monument certainly can read the date and a short benediction and knows the tragedy. And if they turn around, right across the road in plain sight is that sign. People living right there in plain Hebrew. We are not moving.
Ours is a very long term, since '82.
Here is another story you probably haven't heard. Zach Bommel's plane went down in Lebanon in 1982, and he was reported missing in action. 2 years later, a wax impression of his ID tag or dog tag was received from a faction of the PLO. It appeared that Zach had become a hostage. Our Israeli producer, Bill Dackman, spoke to Zach's parents, Miriam and Yona Bommel, from their home in Jerusalem.
Let me ask you a question. What would the purpose be for them to be keeping your son as a hostage?
There's a long history of hostage keeping in this part of the world. Syria in particular has kept Israeli soldiers incommunicado for periods of up to 16 years, and then announced that they're holding them and they want to exchange them for something specific.
The fact remains that this ID tag was held by the PLO. This we knew, and we requested Rabin to see what he could do about finding it.
Did you find out?
No, the promise of Arafat to Rabin at the time that he gave the ID tag was reneged on. He then, in the very end, said that he knew nothing.
You had mentioned earlier about when you make an agreement here in the Middle East, it's not like making an agreement elsewhere in the world. Could you maybe elaborate on what an agreement would mean here being made in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, the use of language is different in the Arab world and in the Western world. They understand the meaning of words differently. So they're not necessarily lying when they don't live up to the agreement. But to the Western observer who is unaware of this, they are lying. And this causes difficulty at times and leads to a great deal of ill will. In most cases, the only time they will live up to the agreement is under pressure, under duress. And that's specifically what we're talking about now in the case of the Israeli MIAs.
Are you hopeful that about your son?
We certainly are. We know that if Israel were to stand firmly behind us, then we could succeed.
Remember when, my doubtful child, you saw the promised land. My covenant was kept, the promise and love I gave you with my own hand. Remember when, my only child, I sent to you from above, a shedding of blood, a heavenly promise, eternity with love. Our Father, we cry in the darkness. Abba, our Father, it comes from our heart. We try to remember your love without end, the goodness and mercy of Him you will send.
Abba is a wonderful word in Hebrew. Father, you hear the little children in Israel, Abba, Abba, Father, Father, or Ima, Mother. Abba, our Father, and He's the only source of truth, especially these days. You sure aren't going to get it out of the media, as we have talked about many times. For some reason, almost 100% of the media is biased against Israel and in favor of the Arab positions, and that is extraordinary, considering who's who and what they're doing. And we need to remember that media people are salespeople. I've said it before. They're not really there to give serious news. They're there to sell the soap and the beer and the stuff in the commercials. That's all that they're there for. When I was a newspaperman, I reviewed concerts, operas, art, movies, and I was told in no uncertain terms by the editor to find favorable reviews of such and such movies because they buy a lot of ad space in our paper. I said, don't you want my real opinion? No, not at all. We want to please our customers. And that's how Mike Wallace and Ted Koppel and the others do business, and that's all there is to that simply has to be true. The media also has the fault of covering one hot spot at a time. They'll concentrate on one story. O.J. Simpson's been going on for I don't know how long, to the detriment of international news, of course. And then Haiti, and then Iraq and the troop movements and so on. And this stuff just continues on and on. until they decide people aren't watching that anymore, and therefore sales of the soap are going down, so we go to another hot spot. So meanwhile, in a place like Israel, life goes on, difficulties are realized, and we don't know anything about it. Also, in this day when we're trying to make treaties with the Arab dictators, Arab promises are only for effect. It's as it was said in the program, words have different meanings and language is used to a different purpose. It's like the old communism and the big lie. Whatever they could say as propaganda became the truth. The government was the arbiter of what was true, even in science. I can remember learning in college about the science of genetics in Russia, and the people who were communists, the party members decided the correct genetics, not the biologists. They listened to the party members. So it was with religion, the Russian Orthodox Church notoriously carrying out the will of the dictating government. Well, as Benjamin Netanyahu's informed us on a previous program, he's the leader of the Israeli parliament opposition, the Likud. The Middle East is littered with broken treaties. We are now trying to talk to Assad, one of the bloodiest men alive, the so-called president of Syria. We're dealing with Arafat. Our government goes there and sits seriously in those throne rooms and bows to those people. It's absurd. It's nothing good can come of it. What really will come of it, of course, Bible people know, is the tribulation period. The Antichrist is the last one to go to the Middle East and try to make a peace treaty. Well, we go there all the time. We point our cameras at it, and we show you the truth. We show you what's there on the ground. You believe me, you can trust what we're reporting. We may have a bias, but by gosh, you see the pictures, and I'm sitting here, and you can write to me, and I will answer. I will answer, at least in our newsletters. Our offer tonight is about the situation in Israel in a very direct way, discovering our Jewish roots. This wonderful tape series by church-going ladies from Kentucky. I've told you about it before. I learned from it. It's great stuff. It's not me talking. It's these people you've heard all your lives, so to speak, on 8 beautiful tapes that you will love to hear, and you'll learn a lot of all these subjects on there. And also the Faith in the Fire cassette, which features the music from our series. Particularly the music in the first part of the series. We added some music from our other cassettes to fill out the long 16-program series, but you can get the Faith in the Fire cassette. It's $12, the tape series, $39. And Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Raise up a king, we're lost in a world of darkness. Redeem your people, oh, when will he come? I have given